And welcome, brothers, sisters, working class heroes. This is The Rick Smith Show. Thanks so much for being here. Today on the big program, lots to get to, lots to talk about. Huge, historic day today was probably the biggest story of the day that you probably never heard of. Probably didn't hear it. Finland is now a part of NATO. This afternoon at the NATO headquarters, the flag was raised. Finland's flag was raised. They are now officially part of NATO. And what does that mean? That means a country that has an enormous border with Russia is now a part of NATO. If Putin's argument was Ukraine was going to join NATO and this was creeping infringement, well, guess what? Their actions caused the people of Finland to go, you know what? We need to join the international community and seek protection. And again, didn't hear much about this. No, there was very little about this story. Now, understand, Finland shares about a 900-mile border. This is enormous. This is a big deal, but we didn't hear about that today. Didn't hear much about it. I got a little blurb, one of those little tiny things. Oh, hey, by the way, there's this. Now, here's the thing. Today was all the Trump circus. The Trump show was front and center. That's all we saw. That's all my news feed was full of. That's all, if you listen to right-wing blather outrage radio, that's all they were talking about. And it got me. First, my mind went to let the circus begin because evidently, bread and circus, we need this. And to be honest, I haven't seen Trump that angry looking since the White House Correspondents' Dinner that he paid about $100,000 for to just get skewered by Obama. Pretty upset looking. Some would say he looks scared, and there were definitely shots of that because guess what? The 34-count indictment that has come down, now been unsealed, carries the possibility of 136 years in jail. That's what the left is excited about. I'm telling people, calm down. Calm down a little bit. Because while the charges look great, while the numbers look there, and we'll get to some of this. Now, Trump, what was interesting to me is watching Trump's Truth Social feed where he just went all out crazy and just blathered the whole time beforehand. And I'm saying good. The more you talk, the more that you get out there and you make accusations, and then the more you do the grievance thing. That thing that you ever see that thing they read to you on TV? You may have heard it. It's called your Miranda rights. You may have heard of something like you have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can, and the most important part, will be used against you in a court of law. They always throw the can. It can be. No, it will be. So the more he spews, the more Exhibit A, Your Honor. And on Tuesday evening, from the indictment in the afternoon to Mar-a-Lago in the evening, there was the Trump speech. And it's what you would expect. I mean, it was exactly, I never did anything wrong. I'm as clean as the driven snow. I never thought it could happen to me, which is kind of the line every criminal uses. Never me. I never. You know what the most often used line in prison is? I didn't do anything wrong. I'm innocent. This is what you got. But his spiel was really all about grievance. Every grievance he could have had, it was laid out to remind the base that he's the martyr. Now, a lot of it's conspiratorial, a lot of it's made up, most of it's false. But if you're in that world, you're going to believe. It's all been a hoax. It's all been bad. They've been going after him from day one. He's a disruptor. No, I wouldn't argue disruptor. I would argue he's made his family a lot of money, especially Jared. But I'm not with you on the disruptor thing. Did he do a lot of finger pointing during a little spiel? Absolutely. Everyone does everything worse than me. They're persecuting. Oh, woe is me. Victim card, hugely played victim card. But the 36 counts, I got to tell you, I'm looking at this and I'm reading experts that I trust Going to be interesting. Going to be interesting to see how this plays out, especially if it gets past the judge throwing it out, which evidently is a possibility. I don't think that's going to happen, but it's a possibility. This comes over the hush money paid to a porn star. And I always said from the beginning, I don't understand why you just didn't have a bag of cash laying around and going, here, I don't know why you went through all of these, hey, we've got to make payments from this account and cover it up with this account. I never got that. It doesn't make any sense to me. But evidently, there's more than just the one hush-up money for one porn star. There was the Playboy Bunny, who I guess got $150,000, and the doorman to the Trump Tower, he got $30,000. So all in all, what, about $310,000 in hush money paid up? He paid a bunch of money to Michael Cohen, so there might be other hush money we don't know about yet. But it's this idea that during the campaign, and this is what it boils down to, that this catch and kill scenario that Alan Bragg was talking about, that there are all these bad stories out there. There's all this bad stuff going to look really bad in the polling, especially after the Access Hollywood tape that really was not flattering to Trump's belief structure, especially someone who holds the Bible upside down. Thought, and then you can see how this theory goes, thought that, another sex scandal kind of thing, would be bad to the evangelicals. Sex with a porn star, while married, not good. 10-month-long relationship with a Playboy Bunny, not good. The possibility of an illegitimate child, not good. So pay off a little hush money nobody knows. Now, what the Trump apologists are throwing out is this wasn't hush money for the campaign. This was just to protect Melania, which, you know what? Any rational person would go, I can see that. But I can also see it was hush money to not get into the political twist. Now, the weird part here is people that I respect as lawyers, and Trump himself actually talked about this Mark Pomerantz guy who's written a book. He was a former prosecutor in the Manhattan DA's office. And he wrote this book that kind of lays this case out in that it's, there's some area making this crime that Trump's being accused of, a felony, is something that I guess has not been worked out in the New York appellate structure, and that this could end up before the Supreme Court. So this could go on for quite some time. And as the people that I respect are thinking is going, look, this is a tough lift. This is something that could blow up. And I said from the beginning, this is not the case that I wanted to see come first. I think the case in Georgia, much stronger. I think the classified documents case, much more damning for Trump. But this is a district attorney who said, look, we're gonna go after him for these crimes. Now, this is where my mind gets into this world that I'm in. Doesn't matter which side of the coin you're on here. Doesn't matter if you're my friends on the left who are jumping for joy, putting Trump in orange jumpsuits and all that stuff, thinking he's going to get the 136 years. Trust me on this. I don't believe he's going to spend a day in jail over this, even if he's convicted. They're not spending any time in jail. But it doesn't matter, right or left, center, no matter what. This is going to be a fundraising frenzy. If you're in the outrage game, you understand that outrage means money. Right, left, center, and for Republicans, for the right, this is like a gold rush. This is huge money. You get to play the absolute martyr and say, oh, this is political persecution. They're coming after us. In fact, Trump himself, they've raised $8 million since the indictment. $8 million. It's only a couple of days. If this continues and the right does what it does masterfully, which is cry foul and play the victim and do the martyr game, that number will jump up. I mean, immediately today, I got Don Jr. sending me emails going, my father's innocent, they never send money. I got the Trump campaign sending me T-shirt ads of a mugshot that's never been taken. They didn't mugshot him. There's no mugshot. But there it is. There's the mugshot with criminal numbers on it. Send us money. Because now you've got the fake mugshot merch. We're going to This is going to be a marketing masterpiece. And for me, as the observer in this, that's the interesting part. Because what Trump has always been, give him credit where credit is due, he's a salesman. He's a con man. He's got the base, buying the flags and the hats and the T-shirts and the diapers. He is a merchandising master in this world. And it's all about fleecing the flock. Now, here's the thing for me. The other part of this is I'm going to watch the outrage machine make tons of money because, look, sitting in this chair, there's going to be content for the next 15, 16, 20 months. There's going to be a Trump circus every day. There's going to be all kinds of you-know-what thrown against the wall. Democrats are going to have a hard time cutting through this again. And this seems like deja vu all over again, to quote Yogi Berra. Because 2015, it seems a lot like the kind of oxygen being sucked out of the room. Maybe a little different, because he could possibly face 100. I could be wrong totally. And he could face 136 years in jail for this one. But we'll see. Now, I couldn't help myself today but think about spending mental time back in my 8th grade civics class or my high school government class, thinking about what's the rule of law and what I learned that to be. It means to me that no one's above the law. And today, we did that. It means that no one's above the law. No one, no matter what their station is, how wealthy or powerful or well-connected, or even if you're the former president. If you are accused of a crime, you will have a grand jury or an indictment. There is a process that everyone goes through. We are equally subjected to the law. Now, of course, Trump and his client, no, they're going after us. They're targeting us. No, the reason Lady Justice is blindfolded is it's the cornerstone of our justice system. If the president can be held accountable for his crimes, that's a pretty important thing. And I couldn't help but think back to that all men are created equal thing. That we have taken a huge step to that place where all men are created equal. That if you break the law, if you crime, there's accountability. And, the weird thing to me is I spent a lot of time consuming right-wing media today. And look, lots of outrage candy, tons of complete with their doomsday predictions of, we're fed up and we're going to rise up and, angrily rise up, feverishly, angrily rising up. Leaving, of course, the legal caveat of course, we're talking figuratively, not endorsing violence at all, even though we've been saying violence for the last hour. But when we don't really mean violence when we say violence. No, not that at all. We're just entertainment. Remember that while we're promoting violence. Tons of that. For instance, Breitbart wrote a story about the judge's daughter, who evidently did some work for Kamala Harris during the campaign. Don Jr. and even Trump himself retweeted the story with the girl's picture. You don't think that was meant as a fear tactic? You don't think that's like the horse head in the bed in The Godfather? Yeah, we know where you are. We know who you are. We've got crazy people who now know where you are. And this, again, the dog whistle, the attack mode, but no, we mean it peacefully. Ted Cruz, he said the arrest and arraignment of former President Trump by a left-wing Soros prosecutor today is making a mockery of the rule of law. And, I see that, and I've been seeing a lot of, this is a Soros prosecutor, even though I don't think Soros actually gave him any money. But understand what Soros means. You go back to Jesse Jackson back in the 80s calling New York Hymietown. When you hear Soros, they want you to think, well, they mean Jewish. That's what that means. And the code is right there. Trust me, the code is out there in front because they know. Now, again, caveat, all for peaceful purposes. We're just entertainment. Now, what I also found interesting is my Republican friends are coming out and saying, well, now that you've done it, we're we're going to come after you. Now, what's interesting is all we've been hearing for the last several months is how they're going to go after Biden and Biden's son. Haven't done it yet, but all we're going to do is we're going to investigate them. Going to go after them. And I say, here's the thing. If Biden's son committed crimes, he should be held accountable. If Biden committed crimes, should be held accountable. That is our justice system. And the fact that we're holding someone at such a high level as Trump accountable in this moment, and he is going to get his day in court, is incredible. And it's what we should want as a country. It's what we should be demanding as a country. I listen to a lot of people today say, "Oh, we're like a tin pot dictatorship, and this is what they do in third world dictatorships, and this is the kind of authoritarian stuff that goes on." You go, "Hold on, I'm sorry, he was arraigned, he got to walk free, didn't have to post any money for bond, not being held for 500 days because he stole a couple of peppermint patties and didn't have the money to get out. He was not even mugshot. He got preferential treatment." Going in and out, and then was able to go back to Florida and give a speech where he then railed against the court. I'm sorry, am I missing something? And this is where, this is where I keep coming back to this moment of this is what's great about this country. And we should all be happy that in this country, if you are accused of a crime, you will be indicted, you will be tried, you will have a fair opportunity to have your side of the case presented. And look, nobody's going to have the kind of legal team that Trump's going to have. OJ's legal team will go, "Wow, wish we could do that." And as my wife said, they got paid. OJ's people got paid. No, but this is the weird part of all of this, and this is where I'm struggling in this moment. So I want to hear your thoughts. Was this a good thing, bad thing? Do you think it's going to blow up in Alvin Bragg's face? Do you think this is going to be good for Trump? As I've said, I personally don't see him spending a day in jail, even if he is convicted. And I fear, this is going to go through all the way to the Supreme Court. And, well, we'll see. I want to hear your thoughts. Email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. Going to take a quick break right back after this. Stick around.
We are AFGE, the American Federation of Government Employees. We represent 700,000 federal and D.C. government workers who are the vital threads of the fabric of American life. We support our nation's military. We take care of our nation's veterans. We protect our nation's borders. We respond to our nation's crises and natural disasters. We provide services to our nation's seniors. The American Federation of Government Employees. We work for America.
The phone lines are open. Give Rick a call at 1-866-416-RICK. That's 1-866-416-7425. Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Now, here is Rick Smith.
So as I said, you've got Republicans saying, well, if you're going to do it to us, we're going to do it back to you. And you got Jim Jordan coming out. Jim Jordan said in a tweet, the indictment wouldn't happen if President Trump didn't run for office. And this is probably, this is probably one of the fairest tweets I think I've ever seen Jim Jordan come out with. Because it's true. Had he not run for president, none of this stuff would have come to light. We would have found none of his criming. He would have never had to engage in criming. It would have never happened if Trump didn't run, because he wouldn't have to engage in the catch and kill to guard his poll numbers. And look, he wouldn't have had to guard his poll numbers if he'd have just guarded his poll. I'm going to go with that. Had he just kept his zipper up, maybe not a problem. Maybe don't have to pay hush money. Maybe don't have to do these things. And this is where I come back to this moment. You've got the Jim Jordans of the world and the extremists in the Republican Party who've gone all in on his defense. I'm thinking they're going to be wrong on something. Because Jim Jordan said, well, it's equal justice under the law unless you're a Republican running for president. No, unless you're a criminal, unless you do things that are breaking the law. Now, this is the weird part, because back in 2015, during the election, I was going through and talking with people who were saying, look, Trump you've got all of these irregularities. Let's call them those. No, we're not going to call them crimes. There's just a lot of shady stuff going on. Do you really want to be that kind of a guy who's into the shady stuff and have the kind of national spotlight that comes onto it? And the answer is probably not. And I remember back in 15 saying, look, I don't know if I'm him, if I want to be in this fishbowl, having every business transaction scrutinized and every, bankruptcy and every time you screwed somebody over and, well, every time you've now had to pay hush money. It's one of those things where you go, maybe we not. So I agree with Jordan. Had he not run for president, none of this stuff would have happened to Trump. Had he not rubbed it in people's face, had he not said, if I could shoot somebody on Fifth Avenue and not lose a vote, because in this country, and as much as I want to believe we're moving towards that equality for all and that blind justice that I spoke of a moment ago, the reality is the wealthy in this country, the rich and powerful, are never held accountable. He could have done all of this stuff and much worse for all we know, and no one would have ever looked into it. But the second you throw your hat into that ring and say, I'm going to be a leader of the free world, that opens you up to a lot of scrutiny. And this idea that, they're just going after him because he's a Republican. No, they're going after him because he's done a lot of stuff and he's rubbed people's noses in it. I mean, I look at this document thing, which I think is a much more dangerous case for him. This document thing, he's not backing up on. I've got the right to steal those documents. I've got the right to have them in my home. I've got the right to do whatever I want with them. I've got the right to not give them back. And, screw you, National Archives, which keeps saying that because when Jack Smith or brings this case, that's going to come up because that goes to your intent. So I'm in the favor of let Trump speak as much as he wants. Go. Because I think that's a big case. I think the stuff around January 6th and all of the election interference, I think that's big stuff. I think the thing in Georgia where telling a Secretary of State to just go out and find me a bunch of votes, I think those are big things. Now, I do think Trump's in legal trouble. I think he will be convicted of something, but I think that's just going to make his base, come around this idea that he's a martyr and he's being persecuted. And we'll see. I'm hoping that there's so much evidence that's being presented that people get it, but I fear it's just going to make him more of a martyr. So I guess in his mind, the more criming he can do, well, the more of a martyr he can be. That's all I can come up with. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. Got a lot to get to today, a lot to talk about. Quick break. Right back. I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. Tomorrow marks the anniversary of the Upper Big Branch mine disaster. This is the first of 2 parts commemorating that moment in labor history. The year was 2010. A massive explosion ripped through Massey Energy's mine in Raleigh County, West Virginia. The explosion killed 29 miners. It was the deadliest in decades. The explosion at the Upper Big Branch mine revealed the ruthlessness of profit-driven mine executives. Raking in $104 million in profit the year before, they callously insisted the explosion had been an act of God. The explosion also exposed the immense pressure on federal and state regulators to look the other way or go easy on enforcement. And it demonstrated just how deep the ties go between industry, regulators, and those in seats of political power. The Upper Big Branch mine explosion served as a testament to the increasingly unsafe and non-union nature of the industry. 35 years ago, 95% of the state's mines were unionized. Walkouts over health and safety were common. Now less than 25% are. And the workers risk their livelihoods if they dare to speak up about safety. Autopsies of those killed in the explosion revealed that over 70% of them were found to have had black lung disease, an entirely preventable disease with proper ventilation. Massey executives routinely violated safety rules as a cost of doing business. American University's detailed study of Massey's safety record for the years 2000 through 2010 concluded that no other U.S. coal company had a worse fatality record. A total of 54 workers, including those at the Upper Big Branch mine, had been killed during that time period. They also found that Massey had been cited for nearly 63,000 violations, including more than 25,000 considered significant and substantial. Like what you hear? Check out more at laborhistoryin2.com.
I have to concede one point. Today's far-right Republican Party does not discriminate against women. In fact, the GOP is giving its female political buffoons a higher profile than its male bozos. Consider Sarah Huckabee Sanders, governor of Arkansas, who became a star in the new Republican crusade to bring back child labor abuse. Pushed by their corporate backers, GOP governors and lawmakers exclaim that the answer to America's so-called labor shortage is not to make jobs more attractive, but to fill them with cheap, compliant children. Huckabee Sanders rushed to the aid of these corporate powers, eliminating a bothersome Arkansas law that had required Tyson, Walmart, and other big employers to get a special state permit to put any child under 16 to work. The meddling hand of big government creeping down from Washington, D.C., she bellowed, will be stopped cold. We will get the over-regulating, micromanaging, bureaucratic tyrants off your backs. So she is using the meddling hand of big state government to creep into the lives of vulnerable children. She is not alone. Ohio's Republican-controlled state government is moving to extend the number of hours bosses can make children work. Iowa wants to let 14-year-olds work in industrial freezers and laundries, and Republicans in Congress have shrunk the number of investigators and lawyers policing child labor abuse, so abusive corporate managers know there is little chance they'll be caught. Most damning, these corporate politicians value children so little that they've set the maximum fine for violating the workplace safety of minors at $15,000 per child. For multi-million-dollar conglomerates, that devaluation makes it much cheaper to endanger children than protect them. This is Jim Hightower saying America should not even be talking about child safety rules in dangerous workplaces. It's shameful to have any children working there.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Now, here is Rick Smith.
So I like the fact that Howard Schultz is no longer the CEO of Starbucks. And I got to tell you, that hearing that Senator Sanders put together where our benevolent CEO came in and was truly offended by the fact that workers would want to fight for better wages, hours, conditions, a voice in their day. Really, he was taken back. And again, I come back to the reality. That guy could have been labor secretary. And this is why we've got to be pushing back as working people against this idea of the benevolent employer. Look, I said Howard Schultz was a good guy at one point, but I still say everything should be in writing. And here to share some thoughts on, well, just that hearing and our benevolent CEO, or former benevolent CEO. I've asked Noah Leonard to come talk with us. Noah's a reporter over at Mother Jones Magazine. He's got a new piece out titled Howard Schultz Came Out of Retirement to Destroy Starbucks Union and His Legacy. Noah, thanks for taking time for us.
No, thank you for having me on, Rick. We had that piece out to correspond. It's something I've been working on for a little while, but it came out the same day as the hearing last week, when he was compelled to testify by Senator Sanders. And it kind of goes into the backstory of this, because I think, like you said, you alluded to, you probably said some good things about Howard Schultz over the years. I think a lot of people had. He was seen as the good boss by many people, but for people who support unions, he basically nuked his reputation over the past year by coming out of retirement explicitly to, or implicitly to, destroy the Starbucks union. I mean, the timing is very clear. They won their first union elections in Buffalo, and just a couple months later, he was back in charge of Starbucks. But the goal, and what I'm looking at in the piece, is kind of to ask the question of why. Why did this person do that? I mean, I think it's a little more complicated than just greed and trying to make money. And it looks at his childhood. He's from a working class family in Canarsie, Brooklyn. His dad was a blue collar guy. And he kind of had this image of himself as someone who protected people like his father. And that's why he took the union drive so personally, because it was kind of rejecting this company that he built to protect people like his father.
No, that's his thought on it. And, look, I've known people who are of an older generation who took this kind of thing personally. Like they looked at their employees like their children. And, how dare you question my benevolence or my paternal instinct and in my protection of you to want something else. And look, I see that he took it personally because I've known people who've done it as well.
Yeah. And I think this isn't just, me or us kind of putting him on the couch, speculating here. I mean, he's more or less said this, and he said it for years. For this piece, I went back and read the many books he's written or had ghosts written for him and kind of memoirs. And it's always the central story of his life is this day in March of 1960 when his dad slipped and fell on the ice while delivering diapers as a truck driver. And what's so ironic or just strange about the story is you read it and you think, wow, what your dad really needed was a union. I mean, your dad had a workplace injury and then was fired and then lost his entire livelihood and didn't get any compensation. I mean, it's the story that screams out for a strong union, but instead how Schultz has reinterpreted it is what it really needs is kind of a benevolent patriarch presiding over the company, and that's enough. And if people try to unionize, that's a personal affront to me.
No, this is that company store idea, though. I mean, the robber barons of the past. We've seen this movie play out, and it never plays out like you've said that they would take care of you. It was always you were only as useful as the next day's work, and in the same scenario as you pointed out with his father, I saw the exact same thing. This is the reason that you have union protection. This is the reason we have laws that ensure that people have a safety net under their feet, as were the Schultzes of the world. And I'm not just singling him out, because again, I've known people like this. They have it in their head that they're the great provider, and it doesn't seem to work out that way in reality. And you listen to some of these stories of these Starbucks workers, and you can go to any company, and it's all about, hey, you're only as useful as today's work, and that's a problem for me.
Yeah, no, I mean and you just saw how quickly it happened. It's now, and one of the interesting parts of working on the story is, we've now had some distance. I mean, this union drive has been going on for a while now, so you can talk about kind of with organizers like people like Richard Bensinger, who helped organize this campaign. He's probably been on the show. If not, you should have him on. But his initial expectation was they would win the first couple elections and then that would be the hard part. And then Schultz would kind of cave because he didn't want to do this damage to his reputation. And Starbucks would be invested in keep maintaining its image as this good employer, this good progressive company. And they've been kind of very surprised at just how far they've been willing to go. I mean, the fact that you have Howard Schultz and Starbucks in some ways being as aggressive or more aggressive than an Amazon is it's surprising. And they've really pulled, as you know, and I'm sure you've talked about on the show. I mean, they've done everything. I mean, every kind of anti-union thing in the playbook that they can find, they've done at this point.
Yeah, but here's the thing, and this is where I'll push back on we thought we'd win a couple and then they would all fall down and come around. Where has that ever happened? Where in the history of American labor history, where has that ever happened? No matter how benevolent the dictator, no matter how good, well-meaning. I mean, just down the road from me here in Hershey, Pennsylvania, Milton Hershey was seen as one of the more liberal robber barons, one of the more progressive, one of the more decent robber barons. And yet when his workers wanted to organize, they brought thugs in from New York City and gave them bats to beat the snot out of them. They organized the dairy farmers around the area to come and make the workers walk a gauntlet as they beat them senseless. I don't know anywhere in history where that has ever happened.
Yeah, and I think the tough part here is, this is kind of the struggle with a lack of, I think, solidarity, and even though, we have these polls saying support for unions is at record highs, and that's a really exciting development. But at the same time, you would hope in a lot of ways a progressive company like Starbucks, their clientele definitely skews Democratic. You would think it would have more of an effect on their bottom line. But so far, it doesn't seem to be costing them that much, or at least Starbucks thinks that, whatever cost it's having is worth continuing down this path and making sure the union doesn't develop.
No, that's an excellent point. But the reality is that people are still going into the Starbucks. There's not a nationwide boycott going on that I know of, so their bottom line isn't being harmed yet. Maybe if we get to that point, maybe they will come around, but I'm not seeing it. And look, as a society, I don't know we're there yet.
Yeah,
The interesting thing about that statistic you threw out, 71% approve of unions. That poll also said 53% of workers don't want to join unions.
Right. Yeah. I think it's one thing to say, you support a union, and I think it's a very different thing to one, want to join one, and then two, beyond that, make the effort to actually start one in your own workplace, and then a whole other thing to be willing to potentially be fired and, not have much recourse. And that's one of the sad things I think that the Starbucks campaign is just showing, not that we needed to be shown it again, is that labor law is not at the point where it really can protect workers adequately. One of the main people featured in this story is a young former Starbucks barista, Victoria Conklin, who was basically fired for organizing her store. Starbucks claims it's for other reasons, of course, but an unemployed, New York judge has found in her favor, but the NLRB has yet to rule, and it's going to take a long time. And even if she wins her case, she's going to get just her back pay minus what she's been making at her new job at an Olive Garden. So, as you know better than me, the incentives here are to fire and pay the fines later.
No, I've said a number of times, if I'm a union busting attorney and I'm advising you, it would be malpractice on my part to not advise you to fire someone and break the law, because there are no penalties, and it's all upside. Oh, he's going to have to he even said he wasn't going to read the letter on video, saying, oh, sorry, we won't do what we did again until we get caught the next time. He wasn't even willing to do that. And I go back to that number of 53% of people not wanting to join unions. I think that has a lot to do with how difficult it is to leap over these hurdles that have been put in the way. Most of the people I talk to say, I can't afford to get into that kind of a fight. I'm just going to keep my head down. I'm making my way. I wish I could have better, but it's not worth the fight at this moment, which is why I think we do need comprehensive major labor law reform.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think it was one of the interesting parts when I was interviewing Victoria for this story. She actually initially wasn't supportive of, she wasn't against it, but she was a history major in college. She was in her mid-20s and kind of knew unions had done a lot, accomplished a lot, but her basic idea was, I don't want to get fired for doing this. But what actually flipped her was when Howard Schultz came to Buffalo to close the deal in November of 2021, or November. And it left such a foul taste in her mouth that she actually then ended up supporting the union drive. But, but that kind of goes back to your point. Initially, this, young progressive woman was, liked the idea of a union in the abstract, but wasn't willing to get fired for one, which I totally understand.
No, look, in this younger generation, my generation, I grew up understanding that union job meant a better life. And I saw it happen in my neighborhood. I grew up in a housing project in the west side of Cleveland. So when the neighbor guy got a job at Ford, immediately their lives got better. They had food at the end of the month. They bought a secondhand car. Kids had bikes. They eventually moved out. Life got better. Union job, better life. There's been a generation, almost two, that have skipped seeing that happen in practice because it's been all downside. Companies have been attacking unions. They've been breaking unions at every opportunity. All of the outsourcing and deindustrialization that's caused so much grief in this country and has been blamed on unions. That's what people grew up with. So to see that number high again is a good start. At least I think it is. Yeah,
and I think, and to your point, it used to be, you would see someone like you in your case, you see someone join the union, their standard of life immediately improves. Starbucks it's gotten to the point where it's actually the opposite happening, where they're giving benefits, but only at stores that haven't unionized, and they're claiming it's illegal for them to provide things like access to credit card tips at the union stores because they're in collective bargaining, despite the fact that, of course the union has said, we don't need to, we're not going to fight you on this one. So, now it's even worse than that. It's, you people, Starbucks workers are saying, oh, if I join the union, not only am I not going to get a contract, but I might be denied these benefits that I would otherwise have gotten at my store.
Yeah, and the thing that gets me is, and you know this as well as I do, the second the union organizing campaign goes away, all of those niceties and all those goodies go away too. Because I've seen it when I was doing organizing. I've seen it happen where we'll give you $1 an hour raise if you vote down the union, and then a couple of weeks after they vote the union down, their health insurance goes up $1.15. So they end up worse off. But hey, they got rid of that union.
Yep. And I mean, and you see that because things like credit card tipping is something that Starbucks workers have asked for years, and it was never going to happen, as I understand it, without the pressure from the union campaign. But and then you have Schultz, but like, and one of the interesting parts of the hearing last week is, he just refuses to say anything he's done wrong over and over again. I mean, the point that his talking point, the lawyers had clearly given him, was that these are just allegations. He said it over and over and over again. These are just allegations, and it's just not true. And, National Labor Relations Board judges have repeatedly found that they violated the law, but because they're appealing these cases, Schultz is claiming they're allegations. I mean, it's not how things normally work in court. If you're found guilty of a crime and you're appealing, you've been found guilty, you might win on appeal, but it's no longer an allegation. But that's how he was framing it.
That's what having billions of dollars will let you get away with. That's the only thing I can come up with. And the one thing that caught me, and I don't know if you heard this, when Bernie Sanders asked him, will you exchange proposals and will you negotiate in good faith? And his answer was very specific. Yes, on an individual basis, on a single store basis. Knowing that you could keep them divided and pitted against each other, we're not going to collectively bargain with all of them. We're going to slow the process down. We're going to run the clock out, and maybe there's an administration that's going to be more friendly to us down the road, so we can do away with all this nonsense. But nobody's getting a contract.
Yeah, and then on top of it, I mean, because these are smaller units, we're not talking about the 5,000 person or more Ford factory. They can say things like, and he even mentioned this in the hearing, they'll say things like, look, only 7 people voted in this union election, and 5 of those people don't work at Starbucks anymore. I mean, they might not, I don't know about this specific example, but, they might not mention that 3 of those people got fired by the company because they voted for the union. But, they can say these things, and if you drag out the clock, there's enough turnover, and we're talking about small enough workplaces that, all the people who, or, a decent chunk of people who voted for the union aren't there anymore. So yeah, like you're saying, I mean, the incentives are obviously to just wait it out as much as possible. And then it's a question of how much pressure the union can put on them. But yeah, I mean, the hearing last week, I mean, you have these senators. I mean, it was interesting to see the Republicans kind of bend over backwards to defend Howard Schultz, who is a man they do not normally like, and normally I assume would be accusing of promoting a woke agenda or something. But in this particular case, we're really going to great lengths to talk about what a great job creator he was, and it's almost embarrassing to watch at certain points where they would say, I don't want to tell you how to do your job, you're obviously a much better capitalist than I am.
Yeah, no, it was in fact, we had Dave Jameson on last week talking about his piece. Howard Schultz went to Washington, and the only friends he could find were Republicans. And that's true. I mean, they were defending him, which I think even Mitt Romney said was odd, since he was talking about running for president as a Democrat. But it goes to show that, look, Rupert Murdoch was right, and this is what I tell my working class friends all the time. Rupert was right. It's not about red or blue. It's about green. It's all about the money. It's about the power, the control that comes with this. And so whatever hat they wear politically, it still comes back down to the money.
Yeah, no, I mean, and I think that's, one of the things I was writing about in the longer piece from last week is, it was interesting seeing at the hearing too, because Bernie Sanders, I'm Jewish, but like Bernie Sanders and Howard Schultz are both Jewish guys from Brooklyn, kind of the same generation. It was interesting. You could see kind of how that generation had split there. You had 2 guys from very similar working class backgrounds, one of whom had kind of stayed true to those roots. And then you have Schultz, who's gone the way I think a lot of people of his generation have gone, where it's just, actually, the answer is not these. I think there's a failure to recognize that the world that they grew up in, and I drove out to the housing project that he grew up in, were built because, that wouldn't have been there without unions. And specifically in his case, it's an interesting one. It's not a normal housing project. It was built specifically for middle income, mostly white families who were kind of in a donut hole, too rich to be in public housing, but not wealthy enough to be in market rate housing. And the fact that things like that existed, that government was solving problems for working class people, was because unions were pressuring for it. But that lesson seems to be completely lost on Schultz. And
that's an excellent point. I grew up in World War II surplus housing. This is where we put the poor people that they had nowhere else to go, and just shoveled them in there, off the bus lines, out of reach of everything, and right next to the airport. Oddly enough, on land nobody else really wanted. So last thing I want to get to, though, because Schultz testified, and look, they were accused of firing people, had to hire some people back. Well, on Friday they went and they fired somebody else in Buffalo. It's like never going to learn.
No, I mean, you had one of the original leaders of the Buffalo campaign, Alexis Rizzo, who gets fired, I think it's 2 days after. And no, I mean, because they know, I mean, it's, well, of course, complaint will be filed or has already been filed and will go to the NLRB, but it's going to take months or if not more than a year for this to resolve. And it also, I mean, I think in this case, it's just so clear. It just sends a signal. It's, no one is safe. You may think like, yeah, and now they fired some of the most public people. It's one thing it just sends such a clear message. You can be featured in Washington Post stories. You can be featured in New York Times stories and Mother Jones stories, but that's not going to protect you. We're willing to ride out these reputational costs because we don't think enough people will either see that story or enough people will see that story and then care enough not to come to our stores anymore. And if you're a worker there, I mean, I think you get the message pretty quickly. I don't want to say that it's a hopeless campaign or anything like that. Obviously it's amazing what they've accomplished, but there's been a decline in the number of the rate has slowed down a lot, and I think probably on a lot of workers' part that's a rational response to what they're seeing from the company and the inability of the government. I think despite in this case, despite the NLRB's desire to want to be able to help these workers and protect them as much as possible, they just don't have the tools.
Yeah, no, it's one of these things where it's the laws are just so badly broken at this moment that and we're not the society of my grandparents who they got back from World War II and came to the shop floor and fought for a prosperous working class. We're not that generation either, but we got a lot of work to do. But at least look, there's organizing going on. We'll see where this takes us. But no, I appreciate the time. Great piece. I hope folks will take a look at it. Howard Schultz came out of retirement to destroy Starbucks Union and his legacy, written by Noah Leonard. He's a reporter over at Mother Jones. Noah, I appreciate the time, man.
Of course. No, thank you, Rick.
Good stuff. We'll get links out on social media. I can take a look at that. Going to take a quick break. Right back. Stick around to listen to The Rick Smith Show. We're working people. Come to talk.
The phone lines are open. Give Rick a call at 1-866-416-RICK. That's 1-866-416-7425.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1968. That was the day that Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. was murdered by an assassin's bullet in Memphis, Tennessee. He was in Memphis to support AFSCME sanitation workers who were out on strike fighting for better wages and working conditions. In the later 1960s, Dr. King's organizing had increasingly turned toward addressing the poverty, unemployment, and unfair working conditions faced by black workers. As we pause to honor the memory and legacy of Dr. King today, let us take a moment to reflect on his words. In a message he delivered to a gathering of Teamster Local 815 shop stewards on May 2nd, 1967. In his speech, Dr. King discussed the wave of labor organizing in the 1930s. He recounted the difficulties faced by workers forging new unions. He said, "Yet there was one thing that was won, one thing that was fought for as indispensable, one thing for which all the pain and sacrifice was justified, namely union recognition. It seemed so minuscule a victory that people outside the labor movement scorned it as, in fact, just another defeat. But those who understood union recognition meant the real beginning. Union meant strength, and recognition meant the employer's acknowledgement of that strength. And the two meant the opportunity to fight again for further gains with united and multiplied power. As contract followed contract, the pay envelope fattened, and fringe benefits and job rights grew to the mature work standards of today. All of these started with winning first union recognition. Dr. King died standing up with black workers fighting for that very recognition. Like what you hear? Check out more at laborhistoryin2.com.
You're listening to The Rick Smith Show, where working people come to talk.
I got to tell you, the benevolent dictator frame is an important one because, the more power we give to the rich and famous, to our elites, our corporate CEOs, the more they're going to abuse it. And look, at Howard Schultz was, as Noah Leonard pointed out, viewed as one of the benevolent ones, as one of the good ones. And on the left, a model employer. And I remember saying, look, he does some pretty good things. But like any CEO, it's going to come down to the bottom line. It's going to come down to, to steal the Rupert Murdoch frame. It's not red or blue, it's green. It's all about the green. It's all about the control. And, I think back to an uncle of mine who passed, in the last 6-8 months. And he was the same thinking, that the people that worked for him were like his kids. He was involved in their lives. He would go to their weddings. He was a part of their families. And when they had a problem, and if they went to the union or if they organized around it, he would take offense by it, and grew kind of bitter over it a little bit. That that there was this other entity, and look, some of it can come from a good place, I think. But most of it comes back to that power and that control, that I'm the king of this castle. And I always point to, here where I live in Pennsylvania, the workers' compensation law still refers to the employer-employee relationship as master and servant. So a lot of these CEOs think kind of the same way. I'm in charge. I'm the king of this castle. You're going to do what I say, when I say, how I say, and all of those things. And if you dare question, if you dare ask for more or dare question how things are done, well, you will feel my wrath. And as someone who has been in a union, all of my working life, I see it a little differently. I view it more as a partnership. Look, I'm going to come and I'm going to do a job for you, and I'm going to do it to the best of my ability. But at the end of it, I should have some empowerment on the shop floor. To say if things are dangerous, I'm not going to do them. To say if things are harmful to others, not going to allow it to happen. If it's bad for the community, not going to let it happen. And I could point to over my lifetime, hundreds of times where I've said no to things that I didn't think were right. And I want that for every working person. I think it would be we'd have a better workplace. We'd have a better society. And look, even historians are now coming around to the reality when you have a strong labor movement, you have a strong society. When you have workers who are empowered to fight for better wages, hours, conditions, you have a stronger, more cohesive society. And I've been arguing for a very long time that if we were able to rebuild the kind of union density that even I entered the workplace in, right around the 20 to 22% range, let alone the 35% that my grandparents built, that would bring us back somewhat closer together. People having common interests and common goals and common destinations. But that's not what the wealth class of this country wants. They want division. They want people pitted against one another. And that's how they can use all of this hatred and all of these cultural issues to keep us pitted against each other, because most people feel helpless in the workplace because they've been so badly beaten down by how difficult it is. This Starbucks situation should not be this difficult. Workers should be able to vote. If the union is voted in, you begin negotiating. At a certain point, you got to come up with a contract, which is why I supported, as bad as the Employee Free Choice Act was, I supported that because it had a place for contracts to eventually get ratified. I want to hear your thoughts. Email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com.
It's definitely an eye-opener. Things can change in an instant.
Another deadly tornado outbreak ravages several states, with more twisters on the way.
When you take on big oil, they usually roll you. That's exactly what they've been doing to consumers for years and years and years.
California enacts first-in-the-nation law to rein in big oil price gouging. Plus,
it was a historic moment for the climate justice movement.
The tiny nation of Vanuatu gets UN to address climate justice.
All of those stories and more straight ahead from BradBlog.com. I'm Brad Friedman.
And I'm Desi Doyen.
Stand by for 6 minutes of independent green news, politics, analysis, and Snarky comment.
The Biden administration, and unfortunately the Democrats in Congress, keep pushing these Green New Deal style agendas. Honestly, Mr. Speaker, they just don't work. The wind doesn't always blow and the sun doesn't always shine in East Tennessee, and I'm sure that's the way it is across this great nation.
Hey, Congressman Tim Burchett of Tennessee, you ever heard about batteries? Just asking for a few million people and for your grandkids. This is your Green News Report. Okay, Desi Doyen, another weekend full of deadly tornadoes.
Yes, the third tornado outbreak in just 3 weeks hit the Midwest and the Southeast over the weekend, killing at least 32 people and causing widespread damage across several states, according to officials. But the National Weather Service Storm Prediction Center warns that those areas will have no time to recover before the next round of dangerous storms takes aim at the same areas. While the exact influence of climate change on tornadoes is inconclusive due to lack of data, studies do show that tornado swarms are increasing in frequency and severity because of man-made global warming.
They sure seem to be.
The UK's Guardian reports on new research out of Australia suggesting that melting ice around Antarctica will cause a rapid slowdown of a major global deep ocean current that helps circulate ocean heat energy around the planet. The study projects that if nations fail to cut emissions that cause global warming, then melting fresh water off the coast of Antarctica is likely to disrupt and slow that deep sea current by 40% in just the next 30 years. That's a slowdown that would alter the world's climate for centuries to come and accelerate sea level rise. Meanwhile, a new study in the journal Nature confirms previous findings that the burden of sea level rise is larger, its effects will hit earlier than anticipated, and rising seas will threaten areas not expecting it due to what the researchers call indirect effects. Indirect effects of rising seas are things like damage to critical infrastructure, like repeatedly inundated roads, bridges, and railroads that can cut off communities that need help for long periods of time. But many communities, they say, are unaware of this risk exposure.
So expect the unexpected at this point?
Exactly. But some good news. The Department of the Interior this week announced that the Bureau of Safety and Environmental Enforcement has cleared the way for the nation's first ever commercial-scale offshore wind energy project. And offshore turbine construction can begin off the coasts of Rhode Island and New York, a major milestone toward meeting President Biden's goal of deploying 30 gigawatts of U.S. offshore wind energy by 2030.
Well, don't tell Congressman Tim Burchett of Tennessee.
In California, Democratic Governor Gavin Newsom has signed into law the nation's first penalty for price gouging at the pump.
Good.
It was triggered by gas price spikes last summer that pushed prices to near record highs in the state. The new law gives the State Energy Commission the authority to subpoena private internal oil industry data to investigate whether oil companies are price gouging and punish those companies for excess windfall profits. The state's powerful oil industry spent millions of dollars trying to block the law, but Newsom signed it late last week.
We proved we could actually beat big oil.
Well, we'll see.
Yes. And finally, a new United Nations resolution introduced by the low-lying Pacific Island nation of Vanuatu and passed unanimously could be a significant first step in making it easier to hold polluting countries and companies legally accountable for failing to tackle the climate crisis. The resolution calls on the International Court of Justice to issue an advisory opinion establishing each government's obligations under international law for addressing global warming impacts. That could affect big oil companies facing civil liability lawsuits in courts around the world for knowingly producing planet-warming emissions while deceiving the public about it for decades. Here's Vanuatu's Prime Minister before the landmark vote at the UN.
Together, we will send a loud and clear message not only around the world, but far into the future, that on this very day, the peoples of the United Nations decided to tackle the defining challenge of our times, climate change.
For much more on all of these stories and the many we couldn't get to today, check out our website at greennews.brandblog.com.
Are you tired of think tank approved corporate news and commentary? Are you tired of CEOs telling you what to think, who to hate, and who to vote for? Well, welcome to the Rick Smith Show. We don't take orders from some boardroom, and we don't do focus groups or talking points. We don't work for them, and we never will. I'm Rick Smith, and I work for you. Join us daily at thericksmithshow.com and download the podcast and never miss a minute.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Now, here is Rick Smith.
So you may remember back in October into November, up until the election last year, we here at the program, we ran across a number of states, through Pennsylvania, Ohio, Michigan, Indiana, into Wisconsin, into Iowa, into Illinois to talk about, the Working Class Hero Tour and what's happened to rural America and to working people. And along that tour, we ended up in Erie, Pennsylvania, and look, Erie, one of those places, like Akron, like Toledo, a big used to have incredibly large industries that employed, a mass of the community and was the heart and soul of that community, only to have corporate America decide they're going somewhere else. And while we were there, we met my next guest, who is a history professor at Gannon University. He's got a new piece out that I think is fantastic. It's sad. It's a horrible story, but it's one of those stories that out of tragedy, the hope some awareness comes out of it. He said the title is "My Best Friend Died from Loneliness," written by Jeff Bloodworth. Again, he's a professor of history at Gannon University. Jeff, thanks for taking time for us.
Yeah, I'm happy to be here, Rick, even to talk about a very sad piece.
Now, I got to tell you, I read this and it was heartbreaking, but the sad reality is, and this is I'm gonna make this white working class, and this could be working class across the board, but I think a lot of white working class people will really identify with your story because we've all got somebody who died of loneliness. They lost their job, they lost their families, they got hooked on drugs or alcohol or whatever, and bad things happen. That's a story that's been time and time again across the working class of this country. So I think it's important.
Yeah, look, people hear history professor and think I'm fancy. I'm not. I grew up working class. Class is real, and what happened to my family is all your listeners, they're gonna know somebody hit by kind of economic devastation, family disintegration. I mean, these things kind of come to the head in the 70s and 80s, and my story is about my best friend from high school and college. We both grew up very working class, single moms, quite poor, and college degrees can help you sometimes escape, right, some of the harder realities of growing up impoverished. But class sticks with you.
Right.
I'm a professor, but I'm still working class, and it's a story not just about my buddy Mike, but it's a story of a white working class and brown and black working class America who've been hit hard by deindustrialization. And our people, this, they turn to drugs and alcohol. These are slow motion suicides. And we all have a story, right, in our families and our friend network.
No, and look, back in October and into November, we went to a lot of communities where you saw this used to be the heart of the factory, the heart of the community, and it's filled with people who are broken, and it's filled with a community that's broken because nothing filled that void for decades, and I've been screaming about this for years. And the sad reality, and I think your piece hits at this, and I talk about it all the time, our elected officials don't seem to care. And I point to Ohio. There was a state representative, a Republican representative, it could have been anybody, but this happened to be a Republican representative who someone called him and said, hey, there are no jobs here. The town center's boarded up, the factory left. What are you going to do about it? And the representative told him, you should move. And it's that kind of flip, well, you should get a better education, you should, whatever, instead of saying, how can we build communities that are going to support working people? It's always now been shoved down the throat of the individual, and sadly, too many people are unable to shoulder that.
Yeah. My family's like your family. Lots of people, they want to work, but when all you can find is minimum wage jobs, and you do that for year after year, decade after decade, it saps your soul.
Yep.
I mean, you can't raise a family, and you have to offer people kind of hope that, hard work has its reward. I live in the Rust Belt. I live in a working class neighborhood because that's where I feel most comfortable. That's where I feel at home. And I walk every night, even in the winter, my wife and I, and we see boarded up homes, and we see green shoots. We see signs of hope. But it's not enough to say move. It's not enough to say work hard. Working class people are already working hard. I'm a white collar guy now. I know the difference between blue collar work and white collar work. The people in blue collar work already work hard. They don't get paid for their labor.
Yep.
And what's happening is they realize this. And this despair is just enveloping a whole class of people. And my friend Mike, he succumbed to it. He had a good income eventually after like 25 years of struggle, but there's all of these emotional kind of marks that are left upon families that are just hit so hard by deindustrialization and very cold-blooded economic policies.
No, I'm right there with you, and it's both sides of the political spectrum, which is why I say all the time, it's nobody's absolutely responsible because they're all responsible, but the reality is Republicans have shown me they hate working people more. Look at the policies that they've pursued. Deindustrialization, offshoring, busting up unions, tax breaks for the very wealthy. All of this stuff that has contributed. But Democrats haven't been the great saviors either, which is why I'm thrilled with Joe Biden in this moment. But it's interesting to me because Trump has really, I think in 2015 he hit a nerve that a lot of politicians missed. And I said, look, I said in April he was going to win. Because, I went home for my grandmother's funeral, and my family, otherwise known as the basket of deplorables, they were all registering to vote for him. And not because they were racist, because they are, not because they're homophobic, because they've always been, not because they were misogynistic, because, that's the culture, but because he sold them that he was going to bring Brook Park Avenue back. He was going to bring those union jobs that gave them a lifestyle and dignity and hope and opportunity for the future. He sold them on the idea that the Lordstown automotive plant was not going to go away. He sold them the factories were coming back, their dignity and their pride were coming back, and he let them all down.
Yeah, those are, it's about jobs, it's about dignity. It's, if you watch movies and TV shows, working class people are the butt of every joke. There's just, you can give somebody some money and that matters, right? Being able to pay for your kid to get new clothes and not having to worry every day about where this is coming from. I grew up like that. It's only the last 10 years I've been able to not have to constantly stress about income. I'm very lucky. But we live in a culture, right and left, that I've been slow to accept this, just doesn't really care about the struggles of the working class. At least the Democrats they'll talk more and more about kind of brown and black working class folk more than white, but they're not actually interested in what working class people think about crime or social issues, right? It's like they don't actually care about working class people other than votes. They'll take our votes.
Yeah.
And it's painful to watch.
No, I know when I got broken. I'm a registered Democrat because I have nowhere else to go. Because as I've said, Republicans in my lifetime have shown me they hate working people. Look at what they do. Ronald Reagan, when he became president, destroyed a good portion of the Great Society programs that in my housing projects, kids benefited from. Ketchup is a vegetable was a motto there. And I go to Bill Clinton, who, understand, as a kid, we were on food stamps quite often. This idea that we're going to do away with welfare and we're going to have workfare but no jobs is ridiculous to me. And again, it was that moment for me to go, they really don't know what it's like to be poor. They may have been poor, but they don't know what it's like now. And their policies are making things worse. And look, when the change to welfare didn't make it any better, in fact, made things worse.
Yeah, it's interesting. The older I get, the more I see that my mother is correct. Because she worked two jobs, minimum wage jobs when I was a kid to make our ends meet somehow. And this is what you're correct when you're saying that the elites don't understand. Because my mother worked, and we were still just at the poverty line despite two jobs. She almost never qualified for benefits, right? And if you have a political class that would understand, we want to encourage work and labor, even low paid work and labor, and also kind of give people just a tiny boost up, and but again and again, look, my mother's elderly now. She can barely walk. She's 79, barely walk after a lifetime of labor. And she's still correct. When she applies for programs as an elderly person, she makes too much money, which is laughable. And so if we had a political class that had working class people in the halls of power, if they had you there, Rick, or they had me there, or one of your listeners who could say, no, let me tell you about my aunt and her experience, right? I mean, you could build policy, but they're not interested. I study American liberalism in the 40s and 50s into the 60s. We used to be at the table.
Yeah.
And now we're not.
Yeah, but anytime someone talks like you just did, Jeff, you're communist. That's socialism, Jeff. Caring about the poor, caring about the downtrodden, caring about the low-wage worker. It's communism.
I'm convicted, I suppose. But look, at the same time, on the left, a lot of working class people that I know, a lot of educated people I know, will look at social issues in a way that's not down the line left, and they'll say, well, maybe abortion rights, maybe a 20-week limit, maybe that's reasonable, right? And look, I'm not saying who's right and who's wrong, but working class concerns about crime and about abortion, these hot button social issues, it's not welcome in the Democratic Party, right? And so it looks working class people have, slightly more moderate views on some of these issues. I mean, you talked about your family, they're like my family, misogynist, homophobic, but it's on a continuum, right? They might be homophobic, but then they know somebody who's gay. Well, that's Larry.
He's okay.
Like Larry.
Yeah. Or they just don't talk about it. And
yeah.
this is you're absolutely right. Because they've got friends who are of different races. They've got wives and girlfriends and daughters. So while they have all of these tendencies to lean in those directions, it's not magnified to the point of extreme. But you're right. Our culture does pull that out of us, doesn't it?
Yeah. No, our politics. If you let working class people, give them in the halls of power in the Democratic Party or the Republican Party, right? But I've given up on the Republicans. They would have to moderate the views, on certain issues, and working class people could see themselves and see their ideas reflected. Instead, they're like, well, the Democratic Party, according to my perspective now, is now like there are no limits on abortion on demand, and it's federally funded. Look, and I'm not saying that's right or wrong.
I think you're making a right-wing argument here, though, because it's not at any time. I think the 20-week number had been in law for years and years. The right loves to say that you can have it right up. You can have it right up to the moment of birth. Like when my wife and I are racing to the hospital, we get there and the doctor asks us, "So which way are we going with this?" Nobody's advocating for that on the left.
No, I understand. Look, I'm not trying to make it, but if you listen to Democratic officials and you say, well, let's go back, to Roe in 20 weeks. Most Democrats actually believe that.
Yeah, most of us said, leave it the hell alone. It was okay the way it was. Why is Florida going to a 6-week? Why are they going to the point to where we're going to make it to where it's impossible to do? And now look, I'm also somebody who's personally against abortion. Yeah. So I'm, but what I do know is I don't want my daughters to live in the world that their grandmother lived in, who had a friend who died from a botched abortion because it was illegal. I'm pro-safety in this world. I want it to be rare, safe, legal, that stuff. But I'm pro-safety. I want my daughters to be safe. I want people to be safe because what I know is working class women are the ones who are going to die. The wealthy are going to be able to go wherever they want, however they want, and get whatever they need. It's working class people who are going to suffer.
No, you couldn't be more correct. Especially in the red states. It's a scary time. I when I hear Nancy Pelosi and other Democratic elites talk about it, I don't hear them talking about reasonable 20-week bans, 20-week limits as much as you used
wasn't that
to.
the law, though? I mean, it's not. See, this is where I get into it because I hear this argument a lot about Democrats, and I'm going to be a little defensive for them.
Okay.
This is one of those things where we're going to negotiate. You and I are going to negotiate. You'll be on the right. I'll be on the left. You come to me and say, you know what? I want both your legs. And I'm going to say, no, I need both my legs. How about just the foot? No, I got to have one. Okay, just up to the knee. And then 6 weeks later, they come back. No, I need them both again. No, just take the other one. Until eventually you negotiate both legs away. It's just down the road because we're being reasonable. At some level, I do think Democrats have to draw a line in the sand, as Republicans have, and there's got to be some views that the American people have got to come together on. And some of it is how we vote. Or do you see it differently?
No. It could be they're just, trying to establish a hard line for bargaining. Look, I mean, I think the center position on abortion is clear and available to Democrats if they're willing to take it.
Yeah, it's my position.
It's like that on a whole panoply of issues. If they just take, and I think it's the working class mainstream, right? I mean, listen to working class people, middle America, white, black, and brown, and they can win that's the only way to defeat Trumpism.
Yep. Is
to beat them at the polls again and again and again. And that's the only way they're going to change. And I think if they only listened, that doesn't have to be me. Like, don't listen to me, right? I mean, I have a PhD. Ignore me. Go in and talk to regular, ordinary, working class people. There's a lot of wisdom there. Let those voices be part of the Democratic Party again.
I absolutely agree with you, which is why we do this little program here. Because as I said, we did this tour across a number of states that used to be moderately Democratic states, middle of the road, Iowa, the perfect example. And they said, look, right-wing talk radio and Fox News radicalized this state to where now it's not even considered on the map for Democrats to win because it's so radical.
Yeah, no, and there's a belief, I think, on the Democratic left that, white working class people are lost. You can't reason with them. You can't talk to them. I mean, but we're not talking to them.
No.
That's the problem.
We're not even talking at them anymore. I mean, that's the weird part of this. Because, I come back to this. It's the economic message as well. James Carville, it's the economy, stupid. We've got to get back to that because ultimately I go back to my family. They believed what Trump was shoveling. They didn't necessarily think he was a good guy. They didn't necessarily trust much of him, but he hit that nerve. We're going to give you the pride and the dignity that you're going to be able to support your family. And I think that's what I think Biden is trying to do some of that. I think, reshoring some manufacturing, I think that's helping, supporting unions, it's helping a little bit. Because look, and I think you wrote this in your piece, how can we fix how can the party of free markets, fix problems that the free market created? And that's reality. Democrats, as you pointed out, used to be the party of the working class and are our last best hope to do some of the things that Biden's doing.
This is what's so frightening is that the Republican Party is sadly, if you look at the numbers, has become the party of the working class, which is just chilling. I understand it. Right? I mean, because the Democrats don't really speak to working class Americans anymore. We have highly educated people who think they speak for the working class, but they're not actually interested in what the working class has to say. And working class Americans sense that. They're not dumb. And it's just a sad reality that the Democratic Party is no longer the party of the working class. Maybe we can revive that because the policies are clearly the party of the working class, right?
Right.
More so than the Republicans.
I say this all the time. Progressive policies are very popular, even if progressives aren't. It's those policies that I think are important and that we have to be talking about, which is, like I said, when we went through those states and talked to people in Ottumwa, Iowa, talked to people in Eau Claire, Wisconsin, talked to people in Toledo, Ohio. It was that economic message. It was that centrist kind of, hey, we're going to rebuild your community and give you pride and dignity again, and we're going to leave you alone. Let people lead their lives. And my grandfather always said, don't worry about me, worry about yourself. If we were that society, worried about ourselves instead of what somebody else is doing in the confines of their four walls with consenting adults, we'd be a much, much better off society. So last question I've got for you. How do we take what clearly is in this article, this tragedy? What do you want people to learn from this? And again, I sympathy for your loss and for Mike's family. But what do you want people to take from this?
I want to look. Everyone out there who's listening has a friend or a relative who has died in early age, right? The white working class is alone in the entire globe who's seen their life expectancies decline in the last 20 years. And it's generally slow motion suicides. And so first of all, if you have someone in your life who died at 50 from, alcoholism or some sort of associated malady, these are called deaths of despair. And they come from somewhere. And where they come from are intentional policy decisions from 30 or 40 years ago. And deindustrialization, the removal of the safety net, right? We have a working class America that is just sliding into despair and into early death. The good news is that we can understand the roots of it. And if we recognize what's happening, we can organize and we can reverse those policies and give working class people lives of dignity again. It used to be the norm. We can return to that America, right? Really make America great again.
There you go. Jeff, I appreciate you taking some time for us. I hope folks will take a look at the article. My best friend died from loneliness. We'll get links out on social media, how you can read it. Highly suggest it. Jeff Bloodworth, I appreciate the time.
Thanks, Rick. Appreciate it.
Thanks so much. Again, make sure you check out the article. We'll get links out on social media, how you can take a look at that. Going to take a quick break. Right back. Stick around. Listen to The Rick Smith Show.
We are AFGE, the American Federation of Government Employees. We represent 700,000 federal and D.C. government workers who are the vital threads of the fabric of American life. We support our nation's military. We take care of our nation's veterans. We protect our nation's borders. We respond to our nation's crises and natural disasters. We provide services to our nation's seniors. The American Federation of Government Employees. We work for America.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Now, here is Rick Smith.
I gotta tell you, I love the fact that he framed that in, we did this. Our policies made this environment possible, and our policies can make it better. Our policies can move us in a better direction. We can fight for better jobs. We can fight for a health security across the board. Because if you read these stories of people like his friend Mike, it's the same story over and over and over again. Lost a job, lost the family, got hooked on drugs and alcohol. You had despair and hopelessness and a spiraling down of health. Then this is the weirdest part about this. Then you end up costing the system even more money because now you're poor enough. Now you're poor enough to get those benefits you couldn't get when you were eking out a meager existence. This is the insanity of the whole system. And especially now as we're moving towards a time frame where we're going to be losing probably millions of jobs to automation, this might not just be working class men. I want to hear your thoughts. Email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1968. That was the day that Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. was murdered by an assassin's bullet in Memphis, Tennessee. He was in Memphis to support AFSCME sanitation workers who were out on strike fighting for better wages and working conditions. In the later 1960s, Dr. King's organizing had increasingly turned toward addressing the poverty, unemployment, and unfair working conditions faced by black workers. As we pause to honor the memory and legacy of Dr. King today, let us take a moment to reflect on his words. In a message he delivered to a gathering of Teamster Local 815 shop stewards on May 2nd, 1967. In his speech, Dr. King discussed the wave of labor organizing in the 1930s. He recounted the difficulties faced by workers forging new unions. He said, "Yet there was one thing that was won, one thing that was fought for as indispensable, one thing for which all the pain and sacrifice was justified, namely union recognition. It seemed so minuscule a victory that people outside the labor movement scorned it as, in fact, just another defeat. But those who understood union recognition meant the real beginning. Union meant strength, and recognition meant the employer's acknowledgement of that strength. And the two meant the opportunity to fight again for further gains with united and multiplied power. As contract followed contract, the pay envelope fattened, and fringe benefits and job rights grew to the mature work standards of today. All of these started with winning first union recognition. Dr. King died standing up with black workers fighting for that very recognition. Like what you hear? Check out more at laborhistoryin2.com.
I have to concede one point. Today's far-right Republican Party does not discriminate against women. In fact, the GOP is giving its female political buffoons a higher profile than its male bozos. Consider Sarah Huckabee Sanders, governor of Arkansas, who became a star in the new Republican crusade to bring back child labor abuse. Pushed by their corporate backers, GOP governors and lawmakers exclaim that the answer to America's so-called labor shortage is not to make jobs more attractive, but to fill them with cheap, compliant children. Huckabee Sanders rushed to the aid of these corporate powers, eliminating a bothersome Arkansas law that had required Tyson, Walmart, and other big employers to get a special state permit to put any child under 16 to work. The meddling hand of big government creeping down from Washington, D.C., she bellowed, will be stopped cold. We will get the overregulating, micromanaging, bureaucratic tyrants off your backs. So she is using the meddling hand of big state government to creep into the lives of vulnerable children. She is not alone. Ohio's Republican-controlled state government is moving to extend the number of hours bosses can make children work. Iowa wants to let 14-year-olds work in industrial freezers and laundries, and Republicans in Congress have shrunk the number of investigators and lawyers policing child labor abuse, so abusive corporate managers know there is little chance they'll be caught. Most damning, these corporate politicians value children so little that they've set the maximum fine for violating the workplace safety of minors at $15,000 per child. For multi-million-dollar conglomerates, that devaluation makes it much cheaper to endanger children than protect them. This is Jim Hightower saying America should not even be talking about child safety rules in dangerous workplaces. It's shameful to have any children working there.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Now, here is Rick Smith.
So some big news coming out of Wisconsin. It looks like the Democrat won the Supreme Court seat, which means that the balance of power in Wisconsin's Supreme Court will flip. So maybe some opportunity to undo a lot of the gerrymandering that's gone on in that state. Also in Chicago, looks like Brandon Johnson has won. I guess that's the latest that has come out, projected to win. So kind of a good night for Democrats. But here to share some thoughts on these elections and maybe where this is going to take us. Maybe a little bit about the big event today that happened in in New York, and, well, maybe what's going on in Ohio. I've asked my good friend David Pepper to come share some thoughts. He's the former chairman of the Ohio Democratic Party, also the author of Laboratories of Autocracy, a wake-up call from behind the lines. David, thanks for taking time for us.
Thanks. Good to be with you again.
So let's start off with Wisconsin. Any thoughts?
Yeah, it's huge. I mean, we had the same fight in Ohio over a couple years. Sometimes these court races get lost, but when democracy is under attack in these states, and so much of it is coming from lawless state houses and gerrymandered state houses, having an independent court that can stand up to those state houses, strike down crazy laws, potentially strike down gerrymandering is massive. And I really, this is, we know this, we both were part of those 2011 fights over collective bargaining. No state in the country has had a more warped legislature from gerrymandering than Wisconsin. It's a lean blue state that's been acting like a far right state for a decade because of this horrific gerrymander, where they literally have had a supermajority of Republicans in the state house, even when Democrats chose the other side. And I think this court, like among many decisions, could play a major role in undoing that rigged system. So this is a big win for Wisconsin. It's a big win for democracy. It also, I think, has massive national implications. And it's a big win for women. I think it was pretty clear that the right to choose was in the balance in this decision. And I think the women of Wisconsin now have a reprieve, as opposed to other states where abortion is being banned with no exception. So it's a huge win there.
It's a huge win. Also, I'm looking at a Senate race in the Wisconsin's 8th senatorial district between this Dan Nodal, I guess his name is, and Jody Sinkin, I guess her name would be. This is a neck-and-neck race with 91% of the vote in. You're looking at Nodal with 50.5% of the votes and Sinkin with 49.5%. So this race is, I think, equally important, because this would, if the Republican wins, would give them the ability to override, I guess, basically any veto that the Wisconsin governor would veto, anything that he vetoes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, that's a big one. I haven't been paying much attention to that one, but yeah, that's obviously, and I know the folks in Wisconsin were working very hard to try and make sure people did not only focus on the Supreme Court race. We'll see where that one ends up.
Let's go over to Chicago real quick before we get into something else. The Chicago race, interesting in my view. You've got Brandon Johnson and Paul Vallis. I know people who are cheering for either side. It looks like Brandon Johnson is as the projected winner. Any thought there?
Yeah, I mean, I didn't have a real dog in the fight. I mean, it looked like, if you're going to run for mayor of Chicago, you probably don't want to spend so much time criticizing Democrats, including the president. And it looked like Brandon Johnson got a lot of progressives excited. So, I mean, it feels like, again, from a distance, I don't want to act like an expert, that this will really give a fresh start to Chicago, who's had, I think, a pretty challenging few years. So, I think people seem to feel good about him as a candidate. We'll see where it goes.
Yeah, I mean, voting extremely important. I mean, you look at both of these states, the races, and I'm sure tomorrow we're going to hear an awful lot of the shenanigans, especially in Wisconsin, where I know there have been years of making it harder for people to vote, especially in college towns. But I look at Ohio right now. It looks like you're going the next level to try and make it harder for college students to vote. I guess there's a new voter ID law. That, as I understand, and you're the expert on this, but as I understand it, this is being targeted at college students. Am I getting this right?
Yeah, basically, they know so we've had a voter ID in Ohio for years. You could show a photo ID, but you also had other options. And so students who are in Ohio, let's say, who grew up in, somewhere else, but go to Ohio State, who kept their in-state driver's license from where they're from, could show up with like an energy bill or some other proof that they were on campus, because they don't want to change their license and be an Ohio driver or whatever reason. Well, this changes that. It basically says they have to get an Ohio driver's license or an Ohio ID. There are all these curveballs that they worry might screw up their tuition level or their financial aid level. And this basically completes a 10-year effort by the Republicans, who have never gotten over the fact that Barack Obama did so well on college campuses that he turned Ohio blue. So they have tried multiple ways. Now, we're going to fight back, But this new, it wasn't a new voter ID bill. We've had voter ID. They just greatly restricted what counts as a valid ID. And guess what? Of course not. University and college IDs do not count. So they're saying you can't do that. If you're from another state, you got to switch your license over or get another ID that might throw a curveball and other things. And so they've been obsessed with this for years. We stopped prior efforts to frankly do this. But the other group that's thrown under the bus is 1 out of 4 African-American voters in Ohio do not have the several forms of ID that are now the only ones required. So people who have voted for years at their local precinct, no fraud, if they don't learn about these changes, will show up either this November, or next November, and be told, sorry, you're out of luck. And of course, as always, the disproportionate impact is on Black voters and young voters because the Republicans know that's who vote for Democrats. So we got a lot of work to do. I'm not just whining about it. There's a group that's coming to Ohio that around the country helps provide information and access to voter IDs, including they will pay if you can't afford the underlying documents, they will pay for them for people. So I'm calling out and working on this. We need every city hall, every high school, public school, every college campus to go to bat for their constituents, to show them how to get these IDs. Right now, if you go to the Secretary of State's website of Ohio, you have to go 3 pages in, link 3 different ways to even figure out there's a new rule. That's not an accident.
Yeah.
We need everyone who cares, and I hope it's a lot of people, about these young voters, about these Black voters, about any voter who is now going to be thrown asunder because they don't know about the new rules, to use their footprint, whether there be a nonprofit or a city hall or a university campus, to say to everyone, do you have the new voter ID? Oh, you don't? Here's how you can get one. And if you can't afford one, here's how you can get help to get through that process. We have to do that, or we'll have, I think, a really impacted electorate come next November.
See, this is one of those days where I go, we should have same-day registration. That would alleviate a lot of these problems. Okay, you've made a new rule. You should be able on election day to get what you need. Like you said, bring an electric bill, bring something, and get the ID right there. If you're going to make these kind of restricted laws, you've got to make it easier for people to get them, I think.
Absolutely. And what's funny is Pennsylvania did one of these a few years ago, and it ultimately got struck down because they couldn't keep up with the demand for these IDs. So one of the things that voters should understand is, so we've had a voter ID system in Ohio for years. And the result of it is almost no voter fraud. We're talking about a few dozen cases of irregularities in a year where 4 and 5 million people are voting. So so clearly fraud is not what's driving this, but they claim it is. So there are literally other states, I think it'll be the same here. It costs the state millions of dollars to give out these free IDs, chasing down a problem that we know from the data just doesn't exist, the voter fraud they claim. This is all about suppressing the votes of those they know vote against them. Again, voters of color and young voters. And this is the tail end of 10 years of this nonsense. And there is a court challenge, but it hasn't been stayed. And the problem is the new voter ID rules kick in this week. And that's why I'm trying to raise the alarm. Because the other thing that's clear, as I said earlier, you wouldn't know from the Secretary of State that there's any new rule at all.
Yeah.
And that tells you something. They don't mind if no one figures it out. If they figure out on election day, guess what? It's too late. Their vote doesn't count.
Now, let me ask you this. What do you do if you get there on election day and they say, sorry, you don't have an ID, you're out of luck? Do you get a provisional ballot?
You get a provisional ballot. And then what do they also do in the new law they passed? They shorten the window in which you can cure your provisional ballot by going home and trying to get the kind of ID you want. So they made it harder for you to solve the problem if you showed up and didn't know about the new rule. Again, a total giveaway about what this is. At the same time, they also limited drop boxes to 1 per county. I mean, it's just one set of things after the next. And but obviously, if I'm whining a little bit right now, I hope you forgive me, but we can't just whine about it. There's a lot we can do about it.
No, say that again.
The question is, and this is the part that does bother me. Do we care as much about saving these voters as the other side cares about getting rid of them? And I worry sometimes the answer isn't enough yes. Every city hall in the state of Ohio, Cleveland, Columbus, Cincinnati, Toledo, we know where these voters are that are being impacted. Every city hall, every public school, every university could tomorrow decide we are going to be a place that anyone who walks in our doors knows about this voter ID, and we give them a form that they can fill out to get one of those IDs. If I was the mayor of a city right now, I'd be livid that my voters are being suppressed, obviously being targeted, and I would put the whole footprint of every city hall in the state to bat for these people. So we got to fight hard. The other side is going for broke to crush democracy. And I worry that our side is still a little too passive about what they're doing. Look at what they're doing in Tennessee, for God's sakes, expelling people. They are going for broke. And there are many more options we have to fight for democracy than I see us fighting for around this country. And one of them is every city hall, they're targeting urban voters. It's obvious. Every city hall should take that personally, should be offended by it, and should feel an obligation to go to bat for the voters within the boundaries of these cities that are being suppressed, and should help them register and should help them get IDs where necessary. And all of that work is perfectly appropriate if the Republicans at the State House can use tax dollars to suppress the vote. Every city hall can use tax dollars to lift the vote. This is nonpartisan, perfectly legitimate activity. But if you look around the country, very few cities do any of what I just described.
No, that's an excellent point. I mean, you look, and I think this is a reason that Republicans, certain people, tend to look that way. It looks like they're fighting for something, even if it's wrong. They're looking to fight for something, and you don't see Democrats doing what you've said. And I think you're right. There should be much more aggressive behavior, much more heated rhetoric, if you will, and heated action.
Absolutely. I mean, I'm finishing up a new book where I talk about this. If I were the mayor of a city, I would actually say to every nonprofit I gave money to, hey, what are you doing to get our voters registered? Oh, you're a homeless shelter? Are you registering everyone who comes through the door? You're a food bank? Are you registering everybody? Are you giving them IDs? Because those are the very people that are being purged. And when I give you dollars to feed them at that food bank, I also, part of lifting them back in our community is getting them back into the democracy they're being systematically removed from. I think there has to be a much harder push that we get folks back. I mean, the heart of the attack on democracy is attacking the Obama coalition. It's negating it as much as possible to keep the majority from voting as a majority. And again, we know where these folks are. They're mainly in cities. And I think we need to show a lot more fight. Yeah, I want the Congress to show more fight. But rather than just demanding it of D.C., I think back in states where this is happening, again, there's a lot more that can be done.
No, this is where
voter ID is and so my hope is, although it's a terrible thing, I would use the voter ID requirement as the Trojan horse to get into a much broader conversation about how communities can lift their voters back into democracy, starting with voter IDs, but a lot more other things as well.
No, this is a perfect example of the left doesn't do what the right does masterfully. I mean, I look at Trump today being indicted and all this, and I see all of the media empire around them on the same message. I see a lot of the voters who I know are Trump supporters, loud and angry and ready to take up arms. And yet, when this stuff happens to folks on the left, it's we'll do an online petition or something.
Yeah, no, I don't want to overpaint it. There's some good people working hard, but I worry that. Let me put it this way: as you're saying, it's not only the intensity of their fight; it's the scale of it. It's billions of Koch brothers dollars. It's full-time government inaction from the state level. Purging democracy, purging voters. What do we do on our side outside of a few special races like the Wisconsin Supreme Court race? We do split the pots to raise money to save democracy. We auction off items at little dinners and things. We volunteer. And what I'm saying is, no, we got to scale it up. We have to scale up our fight for our democracy with not just an intensity, but sort of the footprint. Hey, if you've got a Democratic mayor at a city hall, use the entire damn place to lift those voters of that city. And there's nothing wrong with that. And the other side is using their footprint to absolutely obliterate those voters. So anywhere where we can scale it up, we should scale it up. Don't just wait for a campaign to do it in the final month. That's part-time. That's sporadic. Do it all the time through every institution we can. If we don't do that, the scale, we just aren't anywhere near the scale of what they're doing.
No, you're spot on.
And it's just, and I think it's the failure to appreciate their scale and what they are doing that is one of the reasons we don't match it. So again, there's just, you can hear it in my voice. Like, as you said, the voter ID thing is a perfect example. My God, they just won Ohio by 25 points for governor. Tim Ryan got a lot closer. He lost by 6. Within a month, they're shutting down hundreds of thousands of voters through a new voter ID bill. They don't stop. Steve Bannon does not take a day off of this stuff. We too often shut down after an election and don't get started again until a year passes.
Wow.
So that's why we're losing.
Wow, it sounds like you've been listening to the show for the last 18 years, because I've been screaming about this stuff for this whole time.
Yeah,
but good. I'm glad you're here, and I'm glad you're pushing this, because maybe I'm hoping someone will hear it and actually do it, so that we can build the kind of messaging machine and the kind of activism that we see the right has built masterfully.
No, Steve Bannon, he was on his radio show within a month or two of losing in 2020, recruiting precinct executives, recruiting poll observers who were election deniers. He does not stop. And we're still in again, I say all this thrilled about Wisconsin. And the Wisconsin chair and Democrats around the country figured out how important that race was, which is great. But we have to figure out all the other important pieces too, and realize they're not just in federal swing states, and they're not just in federal years. They're all the time. They're state level. And frankly, a lot of them are outside of the campaign cycle entirely. Any mayor could be getting his city. Remember, every 10 years, I was on the city council, so I saw this. Every 10 years, mayors in cities, they get all ramped up to make sure they're counted for the census, right? Because a full census count means you get more money and you get paid. Well, why are we doing that for democracy every year? If we're going to run around, have massive committees to have a complete count for the census, we should be doing the same thing to make sure we're fully counted for democracy, which means we're fully registered. That's not even a campaign thing. That's a full-time operation that we should be seeing. There are some places that are starting to do this. But again, we're nowhere near the level of intensity, the scale of what the other side's doing. And here's the good news. There's time right now to do it, even kicks in by 24. But it starts like right away. And that's, again, in Ohio, my hope is the good part of the terrible news is if we use the potential crisis over this voter ID law to really get people to start to get active about it. Because if we don't do that, we're really potentially losing a lot more voters from a coalition that's already lost too many.
Yeah, lots of work to do. And again, the first step is knowing there's a problem and getting moving. But David, I appreciate you bringing us up to date. Look forward to having you back again real soon.
Thanks. Great talking to you.
Good stuff. David Pepper, former chair of the Ohio Democratic Party. Also, check out his book, Laboratories of Autocracy, A Wake-Up Call from Behind the Lines. We'll get links out on social media. Going to take a quick break. Right back after this. Stick around. Listen to The Rick Smith Show. I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1968. This is a day of mourning. Today is the day an assassin's bullet murdered Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. as he was coming out of the Lorraine Motel in Memphis, Tennessee. Dr. King was in Memphis for a march to support striking sanitation workers. The workers were trying to gain union recognition and safe working conditions. The night before the scheduled march, Dr. King gave his final speech, one that will be long remembered. He urged participation by the congregants, telling them, quote, "Nothing would be more tragic than to stop at this point in Memphis. We've got to see this through," he said, "and when we have our march, you need to be there. If it means leaving work, if it means leaving school, be there. Be concerned about your brother. You may not be on strike, but either we go up together or we go down together." He then ended his speech with these prophetic words.
Well, I don't know what will happen now. We've got some difficult days ahead, but it really doesn't matter with me now, because because I've been to the mountaintop. I don't mind. Like anybody, I would like to live a long life. Longevity has its place. But I'm not concerned about that now. I just want to do God's will. And He's allowed me to go up to the mountain. And I've looked over and I've seen the promised land. I may not get there with you, but I want you to know tonight that we as a people will get to the promised land.
Less than 24 hours later, Dr. King had given his life to the cause of civil rights and workers' rights. Welcome back to The Rick Smith Show. Check out our website at thericksmithshow.com. Got an email from Melissa listening on KTNF in Minneapolis. Rick, you haven't talked about Jim Jordan threatening Alan Bragg with forcing him to come testify. How come this isn't a bigger story? And it should be. This should be a huge. This is. You want to talk unprecedented? Yeah, it's unprecedented that the president crimes and a jury of we the people indicted him, or a grand jury of we the people indicted him. But to have a committee chair say we're going to call the prosecutor in, and we're gonna grill the prosecutor on the case before the case happens. Wow, Melissa, yeah, good eye. Wow, quite remarkable. But you're not gonna hear that at on the right wing outrage machine. And look, the Jim Jordan Weaponization Committee, and he wants everyone to know that it's the Weaponization Committee. What have they brought? I mean, this is the thing. I mean, Republicans, they're moving. If there was actually there, oh, it would be all over the place. Problem is they're having a hard time finding any there. And John, listening on KCAA in Loma Linda, asks, what would happen if Trump went to jail? Would his Secret Service have to go to jail with him? And originally my mind was, if you committed a crime, I would think you would lose your Secret Service. But evidently this retired judge, and I looked this up for you, this retired judge evidently told Sky News that the Secret Service would indeed have to go to jail with Trump. And as my wife says, that's not fair to them, but their job would be to make sure that nothing happens to the Donald if he were to go to jail. So good question. I had to go and I had to look it up. Also, Wendy, and I'm not sure where Wendy's listening from, asked me what my thoughts on Marjorie Three Names going to New York, and then sent the clip of Michael Rappaport that he put out of her just being wow. Yelled at with very colorful language. Let's use that. I can't use the clip. The FCC would lose their mind. But she got what you knew was going to happen, and what she knew was going to happen. She went there to be treated poorly. She interjected herself in the middle of this to get the kind of negative attention so that she can go back and say, look at how poorly they treated me. Look at me, the victim, the martyr. Send me money. Because at the end of all of this, on both sides, this is the fundraising gold mine. This is both sides going list building, fundraising. This is big money operations. Where I want to talk about it going forward, is this justice? Did he commit the crime? Can they prove it? And will there be a jury that holds him accountable? Not the stuff that, oh my God, the sky's falling, but actual justice. If he committed the crime, he should do the time. Just like Beretta said. Want to hear your thoughts? Email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. Miss any portion of the program? Grab the podcast. Thanks so much for being here. We'll see you back here next time.
You've been listening to The Rick Smith Show. Email Rick at rick@thericksmithshow.com. Until next time, this has been The Rick Smith Show, where working people come to talk.